this video, I'm going to, what are we going to do? I'm going to put the oil cooler back on, talk a little quick about oil cooler gaskets. I have done a video on that prior. I'm going to put the oil cooler back on, I think anyway. I don't know if I'm going to all get this done in one night or not because it is after work. I want to put the oil cooler on, the oil pan on, the rear seal back on. We'll be replacing them with new seals, obviously. And I want to do this front frost plug as well because it's kind of crusty. And I don't really want to have a leaky. As we were spending the time to make it not leaky, I don't want it to leak. So I'm going to put the camera on my head and then I'm going to do a voiceover. So as I'm doing it, you won't hear me talking. As I'm doing it, I'm going to do a voiceover. But anyways, we'll get into working on this thing because like I said, I want to button this thing up. I want to get it painted. I'm going to paint this one red. I usually just leave them, I usually paint them black, but I'm going to paint this one red, but I want to paint in behind here. So when we go to put the injection pump on, we can just stuff it on and then paint everything. Everything is going to go red except for maybe the valve covers will paint black maybe or something, but everything is going to go red. Except for a couple little things, just because I want to keep it easy. I don't want to paint a bunch of different stuff, different colors and all that jazz. So I'm going to get after working on this thing.
All right, guys, into the voiceover. I'm putting a chain on the front of the engine. I find it a little bit easier to get that rear seal to go in. So I just pull just the top two holders off for the engine. I just loosen the other ones, but take these and you can kind of pivot it out of your way a little bit and just test fitting, make sure it fits in there, and make sure that I have the right one as well, because all the parts that some of the parts we got through in the parts washer got thrown in with common rail stuff. So at this point, just cleaning up, just getting all the edges cleaned up, all the different stuff, try to get everything as clean as possible when you're putting it together. For putting that seal in, I realize this is going pretty fast. Putting that seal in, most of them are going to come with that installer tool, the left of my hand there. And it's pretty easy to get them to go in. Just tap it in, pretty much good to go. Now this is something that I usually use a gasket on these for the spacing side of things. But I didn't have one, and I have one, I just didn't want to break into a set to peel one out of. So being it's my own engine, I figured it'll be more than fine because I've done it this way before. We'll just put some case sealant on it, stuff it on, and it'll be fine. So want to make sure that seal or your seal area is good and dry on the crankshaft, because it wants to be dry when you do your installation. You want it to be dry. Also, too, when you're putting that rear seal holder on, you want to make sure that it's flush across the bottom of the bed rail. So basically where the oil pan goes, you want to make sure it's flush with that on both sides when you after you tighten it down, or before you tighten it, before and after, I guess. Make sure because otherwise it'll pull funny on the seal and you will have a leak. So that is one thing that you want to pay attention to. So this thing, just clean up the oil pan. If you guys are doing this, you just make sure you don't have to use a knife, but I just find the big Olfa knife works really well for doing it. It's just easy to drag across, make sure it's clean. You can use, like I said, that carbide cutter, or the carbide scraper I really like, but I find the thick gasket, lots of times you can get a bunch of it off using the Olfa knife prior to using that scraper, and then, if you need to use a scraper afterwards, then good to go. There again, just shot of brake clean, cleaning everything up, and then onto the case sealant. I do use case sealant on these. I do not use a gasket for the oil pan. Since we've started doing that, I've never had one leak, so we just put a pretty good, put a good decent bead on there, more prominent towards the outside than the inside, so that when you tighten it down, it doesn't all squeeze on the inside. And you just put it on there and put all your bolts in. Usually when you're doing this, because you put case sealant on, I don't put any Loctite on any of those bolts, because the case sealant gets smushed in there and it holds the bolts in anyway. So, and if you wanted to tighten these bolts, if you wanted to torque them, I don't usually torque them. We just use the little impact gun to drive them tight. But you're 25 to 29 foot-pounds if you want to tighten them with a torque wrench. But we just use little electric impact, that Milwaukee one that I'm using, something like that, to tighten them down, being that everything's case sealed. the torque isn't quite as prominent, in my opinion anyway. Do as you may. If you would like to torque them, by all means, go ahead and torque them. Here you can see I'm just cleaning up that gasket surface, and then I also do hit it with my sanding block as well.
I'm going to reuse the oil cooler. I don't really recommend reusing the oil cooler, but I couldn't get a new one in time to do it. There wasn't anything wrong with the the oil cooler, so I'm going to reuse it. If you do, be forewarned that you could have a problem. If you have a problem, then, well, because you didn't change it. So if I have a problem, kick myself. Now, what I wanted to talk about quick is this is your bypass valve for the system to bypass oil off when the filter starts to get plugged up. So it's the oil bypass valve. I would recommend changing this whenever you have this off. I'm not going to change it because I had this engine running and it had lots of oil pressure. Everything was good as far as that went. And right at the moment, they're hard to get. This had good oil pressure, so I'm going to call it probably good. But if you have low oil pressure and you're not getting any metal or any of that type of stuff in your oiling system, lots of times this bypass will also make a difference to your oil pressure. Now let's talk about gaskets here quick. Now there is more than one style of gasket. The easiest way to do, in my opinion, is this gasket you can use for all of them. This gasket is the older style, so you can see it the same as that one right there, right? Which I'm going to reuse. So if you're taking it apart, just use the same gasket that was there. If you don't know which gasket was there before, 99% of them, the only difference, if you look at this gasket versus this gasket, is this hole right here. And most of them, the oil coolers don't even have it. So like that is basically, this bypasses, I've done a video on this, but it bypasses back to the oil pump instead of back to the sump. So most blocks don't even have the revision for it. If your block does have the revision for it, you do need to be careful. If it doesn't have the one block back to sump and it has that, you have to make sure you have the right cooler, you have to make sure you have the right gasket, all that type of stuff. But just so you're forewarned, most of the time, just put the same gasket that was on there. But if you are changing the cooler and all that stuff, just make sure you're using the right bits. Now, something else I did want to mention, like I said, I did do a video on that, but 99% of the time, if you don't know which gasket to use, the easiest way is if there's 3 holes right here, there'll be an extra hole here, and usually this hole won't be here. So it's like a hole's extra and hole's not. If you use this gasket, you'll never have a problem. If you use this gasket and it had the revision for back to oil pump, you would have a problem. So I just recommend you use this one 99% of the time. So that being said, we're good there. So the other thing is a lot of these kits now come with this, I don't know, aluminum rubber gasket. I prefer the ones that look like this for the both sides. As I drop it on the floor. And the reason I'm going to use this on mine is because I prefer those ones, and I have about 40 of these, so I'm going to use it on mine. Now if you're using one of these on yours, what I recommend, the old case sealant, and run a little bit of case sealant around here and then on this surface here as well on both sides. If you do that, it won't leak. So I'm going to go back into time lapse or talking or whatever, and we're going to do that. Also too, you guys seen that I hit this with a roll lock. That is one thing I use a roll lock on. Just quick buzz over it. Doesn't need to be super carried away. But you can see where I gouged it a little bit there, taking the cooler off, which usually doesn't matter. But you want to be careful, that gouge right there. If you weren't to put anything, it might leak. So if you got a little gouge like that, just make sure it's flat there, and a little bit of case sealant, you're good to go. So basically case sealant the world, and yeah, you're good to go. So I do Loctite these bolts. I basically Loctite everything when I put it back together because I find that these things vibrate violently all the time. So you have problems. So we're gonna case sealant both sides of this. Just a little tiny thin layer. You don't need to gob it on or anything. Just a little tiny thin layer of it. And then also this, I shoot this with high tack. I believe I also have it in my Amazon store as well. Unless I don't happen to have any at the moment, which would be worst case scenario. I don't want some right there. Yeah, Permatex high tack spray gasket. So I'm going to put some of this on. Basically, you just need to get it on the outside edge is what I basically just get it on. You're good to go for the most part, because this side, there's oil, lots of oil on. So you don't need to get too carried away. Just want to get it on the edge to give it a good fighting chance of sealing. And then on this side, same idea. And you guys did see, well, I'll talk about it anyway in the video. I always do hit these I do always hit those with my sanding block as well, because they're not always flat. So if they're not flat, you can get cross leaks in there, and you don't want cross leaks in there. So, all right, I'm gonna throw this back into time lapse. We'll get out.
All right, guys, back into voiceover. So that I did a little bit of talking about the oil cooler. Just getting ready to put it on. Just want to make sure you blow all those holes out, get all the, if there's any oil or anything in there, do the best you can to make sure you get all the oil out. So when you use the Loctite actually has something to grab a hold of. And I'm just putting a little tiny bit of case sealant on, like I was talking earlier in the video, on that edge. Like I said, you don't need a lot, just a little tiny bit. And then same thing on this side. There again, you don't need lots, but I find that if you do that, especially with this style gasket, if you put a little bit on there, it'll seal up. If you don't, they tend to leak, and, well, then they leak. And like I said, you don't have to do it, but, I've had, done lots of them, and this is just what I have found. And like I said, I do Loctite all these bolts just with blue Loctite. Doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be like red Loctite or anything. Just keeps them from vibrating loose is what I find. So just getting all those in there. And there again, if you want to torque these, you'd be 25 to 29 foot-pounds. For the most part, when I'm installing them, I just use the little electric impact gun there again. Set it on, I think, setting 2 or whatever, and it's like 27 or 29 foot-pounds, I think, or something. Or is it setting 1, maybe? No, setting 1, I think. But after you've tightened enough of them, you get a feeling for it. Don't get me wrong. If you don't have that feeling of knowing how tight something is, maybe you should use a torque wrench. But I've been pretty good with it for quite a few years, so tend not to break too many things or over tighten. So we don't seem to have too much problem. And we're getting into and just rolling her back over again. I realize this is going pretty fast. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I don't know if I like... Oh, I'm just changing the frost plug here now. I don't know if I like doing it this way or if I like doing the time lapse, because this kind of feels, I don't know, just the way that it is, kind of weird, the way that the speed is. And this is like 3 times faster than regular time. But anyways, doing the frost plug, you just hammer them out. You just be careful hammering it out. They're really not that bad. I'm just cleaning up that surface because there's a little bit of rust in there, with some Scotch-Brite, and then retaining compound on a seal driver. Drive that new frost plug in. And you just want to get it in there straight best you can. Sometimes they're ignorant, and sometimes they go in really easy, but I prefer when they're good and tight. So. And something else that I noticed, there's a plug on the side of the engine here underneath this engine mount, which is actually for an industrial engine. Not too often you won't find one in pickup trucks usually, but this engine came from Ontario, Canada, which is, they use lots of salt there, so basically in the Rust Belt, and the frost plug was really rusty. It didn't look bad actually after I got it out. But there again, I'm going through all the hassle of, making this engine not leak. And when those plugs move, or if they have a problem, man, do they ever leak. And this one was really rusty on the outside. So it was definitely, I figured I have it, so I might as well change it. So if you guys are in there, if you have that engine mount off and they're really crusty, I do recommend changing them, just because, well, It's a lot easier to change it when it's on a stand than after you get, because to change that, you'd have to pull the engine mount. So I would prefer to do it right now. So, and they're again, easy to change. A little bit of retaining compound. And lots of times I just use a socket. You just tap it in with a socket and yeah, good to go. There is actually tools for this, and you know, I don't know. I find myself usually just using a socket, and I even own the tools. So that is something else that I'm probably going to get some of, and they'll be on the website, but they're just one of those things for the guys, because they set the depth, basically to help you set the depth. So we'll see. That's later down the road, but just thought I would mention it.
All right, guys, so we got that part of the engine done. I'm probably going to paint it, but I'll paint it off camera. You guys don't need to watch me paint it. It is going to end up red, so I'll do that. But I got to blast up the valve covers, so I'm just going to bead blast the valve covers up. And then bead blast the valve covers. I'm going to put the water pump in. There again, you guys don't really need to watch me do that. And I'll probably do a time lapse of video of some sorts. I'm going to paint, well, maybe I will show painting it. I'm going to paint it, put the injection pump back on, do the valve lash. Let me know in the comments if you want me to show you guys how to do the valve lash. I have done a video on it, but I'm not super happy with that video, so I might redo it. Let me know down in the description if you want to know. Doing the valve lash on a 12 valve or a 24 valve, it's exactly the same thing, just because you only have one rocker per 2 valves on the 24 valve. But and then yeah, we'll start getting this thing trimmed out, because the adjustable timing gear and front cover we're going to use off of the truck when we put it in there. And I'm not sure what I'm going to use for a manifold to start with. I am going to use that turbo that I got, that I was going to put on my buddy Craig's truck. But I think I might, I don't know what I'm going to use for a manifold, because I don't have a spare manifold, like a good one. I just have stock 12 valve ones. So I don't know what I'm going to use for a manifold yet. Anyways, we'll figure that out. Because I'd really like to put a Steed on it, but I have like 8 on order, but they take a long time to make. So they're on, I should say, back order. It didn't take a long time to make. They're on back order. So, and I want to put this thing in like in the next few weeks. So, yeah. Anyways, I guess just on the next video, we'll see you then. Remember, it's not rocket science.